How does that saying go? The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to convince people he didn't exist, right? I think the same thing has been done with mind control as a concept. There's been an expansive campaign to try and make everyone think that all that stuff is impossible, it's not real, it's science fiction, it's fantasy, hypnosis doesn't really work, neurolinguistic programming has supposedly been scientifically debunked. Subliminals don't really work either, even though they've spent decades upon decades refining and using that technology.
Ladies and gentlemen, this commercial is going to use subliminal advertising. Subliminal advertising.
But no, supposedly none of that stuff is real, right? And it's interesting because if you believe that, then it's much easier for the people who know how your brain works to use that information again.
The more I get into this line of research, the more intrigued I become. For instance, I did a video a few weeks ago about brainwave entrainment via electronic devices, and that was an eye-opener. But then I decided to try to research mass hypnosis a little bit, and man, it's like everyone talks about how people on the left are brainwashed, and the more I read and learn about this topic, the more I'm compelled to conclude that they really are brainwashed, literally, and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
A lot of controversy about the validity of hypnosis. That's all on purpose. It's been on purpose since they figured it out. Why would they tell everyone how this works and validate it if they hadn't perfected it yet? Anyways, you come down in here and it talks about, does hypnotism affect brain activity? There have been several studies that have shown effects on brain activity after hypnotism. Mendelsohn et al. Studied this through giving people post-hypnotic amnesia. This basically means the hypnotist told people to forget a certain thing after they're hypnotized until they hear a recall trigger word which lets them remember it again. Trigger words. The key place where you will see that phrase up until recently has always been in hypnosis or Manchurian candidates, things like that. Brainwashing, mind control. And now they're really pushing the concept of trigger words on everybody. It's, to me, not a coincidence at all. It really is as if there are people who, they count them down into this trance on the television, they impart the information.
We're counting down to one of President Obama's most important speeches of the year. We're counting down.
Right? And then spin them back out at the end of the show. And it's like mass hypnosis. I'm sure
in general terms, hypnosis needs to pass the following three very basic conditions, tests, if you will. It needs focused attention, impaired or reduced peripheral awareness, and vastly increased suggestibility. Theoretically, these three generally accepted characteristics of a hypnotic state can just as easily be created in a crowd as in a one-on-one situation. Influencers, good or bad, have been using this type of phenomenon and crowd dynamic for a very long time, ranging from religious leaders, politicians, and salespeople, all the way through to stand-up comedians and film stars. For instance, if you are a member of a theater audience and you were totally involved in the play that you were watching to the extent, as we say, you're getting into it, the likelihood is that you are in a trance-like state because your attention is very focused and you are no longer aware of anything that's going on around you. You know that you are in a suggestible state because your suspension of disbelief will have kicked in very soon after the curtain opened. Religious leaders have been doing this kind of thing forever. You can listen to them speaking and listen to the the way they pace their words, the inflections that they place on their words, emphasis on certain syllables. And it's so obvious that they're trying to lull the audience into sort of a hypnotic state from which they can manipulate people to do whatever they want.
Critical factor bypass is a technique used by intelligence agencies to manipulate the minds of the masses. The term itself refers to the process of bypassing the conscious, critical thinking portions of the brain by using all forms of media to saturate the individual's environment with a specific message, and then repeating that specific message over and over and over again until the individual's perception of reality has become so dramatically altered and the message becomes so deeply embedded in the subconscious portion of their brain that they believe that the propaganda that they are consuming is real. You see, we see this technique being used every day in advertising, but most people don't realize that it can be implemented for far more insidious purposes. Say, for example, to coerce weak minds into committing heinous acts, or on an even grander scale, it can be used by the military, intelligence agencies, and those in power to manipulate populations. And ultimately, it can be used to topple entire governments. Knowing this and knowing what critical factor bypass is and how it is used makes your mind impervious to the mass indoctrination that occurs in propaganda campaigns and ultimately gives you a new level of power that most people don't even know exists.
Advertisements are a really good example. For instance, have you noticed how you can suddenly feel hungry during the evening, even though you have just eaten a meal? Tonight, while you are watching the television, make a conscious effort to count the number of food and drink-related advertisements that you're being subjected to. What is happening in this case is that the marketing people, through clever design of their advertisements, are subtly tapping into what are known as your emotional buying triggers, and by doing so, in effect, hypnotizing several million people simultaneously in order to bombard them with suggestions. And politicians are also really high up on the list. Politicians who are said to have charisma are the ones who draw you into their world, paint word pictures for you, and transport you into a place of their choosing, which is reality only exists in your imagination. Their goal is to persuade you that if you follow them, you will be presented with a whole array of glittering prizes. Or if it's a preacher, you'll be awarded with eternal life, and never have to die.
Notice that after the switch to digital, specifically after the switch to digital, meaning it's no longer analog television, they can now layer as many signals into the digital signal as they want to, and there's no interference on your screen to let you know what all is being transmitted when they do that.
Just moments away from changing our whole world from analog to digital here, and it's so exciting.
Suddenly you had every major news outlet using these fast spinning globes and circular graphics that are moving very fast, spinning, and a lot of times they count down the viewing audience into the broadcast. It's almost as if they're counting people down into a hypnotic trance with the combination of the flicker rate and these very intricate spinning circular and spherical graphics. And I'm just going to show you a few examples of that. I'm going to slow them all down by 50% so that I'm not just showing you 10 of these in a row and it has some creepy effect on your brain. I just want you to recognize this and see it for what it actually is here. So you have that, especially after 2008, 2009, when they made the big switch. Now that's become the standard. That's just the standard graphics on any mainstream news show that you see anywhere. It's not a coincidence. And then now that that has been perfected and they've been using that for a while, now all of a sudden, oddly enough, they're finally starting to admit in the mainstream that hypnosis isn't just some wacky, debunked pseudoscience, but that it actually does work and affect your brain. I'm sure.
Whether the hypnotist is selling religion, politics, or merely a suspension of disbelief, there comes a time when suggestion can give way to manipulation. This is one of the most well-known negative aspects of the phenomenon. French psychologist Gustave Le Bon wrote a book called Psychology of the Masses. The book explains covert mass hypnosis, crowd psychology, and how to achieve crowd control. You will not be surprised to hear that Adolf Hitler read that book. Now I'm going to read this next section the way that you'll hear a lot of professional speakers, the way they read, the way they speak, to lull you into a hypnotic state. Firstly, his delivery was confident and ultra positive, suggesting that everything he said was the truth and right. Secondly, he used a lot of repetition, which served to embed his suggestions to the extent that they became a belief. And as we all know, once any statement becomes a belief, it defies all rational counter-argument. Of course, I didn't do it as well as Roger Stone does it. You watch him on Alex Jones sometimes, the way he speaks. It's so obvious. I didn't do it as well as he did, but notice the pauses I made between words and the cadence that I tried to establish. If you'll sit and listen to somebody speaking like that for a prolonged period of time, it will suck you right in and put you under a trance, and it's done very deliberately.
So you met Charles Manson in prison, didn't you? What was that story? Can you tell us that?
County jail. In the county jail. But let me tell you, Charlie wasn't the guy that you saw on the TV specials. All right. He was he was like 5'4", 5'5", little scrawny. He was poor, kind of like a bum, really. And we found out that he could hypnotize you. So we let him sleep in front of our cell to make sure that nobody would hurt him. And he got us loaded on weed. And then he got us loaded on weed. And I said, well, get us loaded on heroin. So the three of us tried to get loaded. He got two of us loaded on heroin. One guy just woke up. And afterwards I asked him, how come he couldn't do him? And he asked, did you ever get loaded on heroin? He goes, no. Well, your mind doesn't know how to work. Do you understand? Your mind doesn't know how to react. So if I tell you to do something while you're hypnotized and you haven't done it before, or you don't know how to do it, you'll just wake up. And that's what kept happening.
Yeah, so you're saying that he got you guys loaded up on heroin or weed, but there was no absolutely. Heroin or weed in the room, right? He was doing this purely through hypnosis.
And looked, hey, what you doing? And everybody was like shocked. And this Johnny Ronnie Cruz, he was like, well, what happened? He never got loaded. And boy, I was sorry when they transferred Charlie out.
You've basically got unlimited access to anything that you want because he can just keep on hypnotizing you back into it.
And my friend George Perry knew him in Frisco, knew him in Oakland, okay? And he was a scrawny little hippie. And the girls that he got, Linda Kasabian, all of them were broken. All of them, they were up in Oakland and San Francisco being ripped off by the pimps and raped by the pimps. And so he came around with a big bus and some acid and said, let me lead you. So it was kind of like they looked at him like, yeah, he's the Messiah.